I'm really excited to welcome all of you to our DesignOps Friends of Figma chapter, where today we are going to speak about the way how we are visualizing processes in DesignOps. And at the end, we will cover something about how to do the right audit of the processes and how to scale that as a part of change management. But first, I would like to introduce our amazing speakers. Peter, would you like to go first and introduce yourself to the community?
Sure. I'm Peter Boersma. I'm DesignOps manager at Miro. I have a long history of being basically a design process freak. I have a large collection of design process diagrams, and I'm happy to share knowledge and also to get feedback so I can learn faster.
Thank you. Thank you for your introduction. Brian, would you like to go next?
Sure. My name is Brian Duchek. I currently work at DocuSign, where I'm one of the first DPMs. In fact, in certain contexts, I only respond to DPM when people address me. I'm a former product designer, a UX designer, front-end developer, bassoonist, and I'm excited to finally be able to give back a little bit to Fareed's excellent sessions in this context. So thank you, everyone, for coming in and listening to us blather on for a little bit.
Thank you, Brian, for your kind words, and thank you for investing time in sharing with the community. Great. Daniel, would you like to go next and introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. First, thanks for inviting me, Fareed, and I'm glad to be sharing the stage here with Brian and Peter. So I am Daniel Souza. I'm an information architect and design researcher. Been doing design ops things for about 5 years now, right? I'm also a process freak, as Peter. I'm actually married with a business process analyst. So I have a love-hate relationship with process design and change management. So I'm also love data visualization and process visualization. So I'm really happy to be sharing with you folks some of the work and also the techniques to make things visible.
Great, thank you. I guess like we are all have the same interest in visualizing diagrams and standardizing things, information architecture, process diagramming. So yeah, I'm really excited to welcome all of you. My name is Fareed Sabitov. I'm leading DesignOps chapter at Friends of Figma. I'm also program curator at Rosenfield Media. We're organizing DesignOps Summit 2022 this year with Bria from Adobe and Sarah from Intel. And I have a good news for you as well, because the topic that we're going to discuss today is similar to one of the talks that Candace from Netflix will share in her talk. So I'm really excited to share that with you and also give you a promo code that DesignOps Summit 2022 gave specifically for Friends of Figma. And they are giving out 5 books for free if you will use the promo code that we were going to speak about today. Great. The first thing that I would like to share with you is how FigJam works. We wanted to make these sessions as collaborative as possible. So that's why we really want to hear your feedback. So you can use stamps and reactions by clicking on E button. You will be able to share your reaction. So if you like something, please do that so our speakers will feel and will see your feedback. And let's do the high five spot. So yay! If you will just like move your cursor quickly here, we'll be able to do the high fives. Great. I can see lots of people are doing high fives now. So
am I doing it wrong? I feel like I'm doing it.
You need to move your cursor really fast and you need to turn on the hand tool.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. So yeah, I see a lot of people each other. So this is great. Let's start. So the goal for today is show how we are organizing chaos inside our organizations via process visualization. So it's just a really interesting topic for me personally. Great. So let's start. The first thing, continuous process and service design. Danielle, would you like to start our discussions?
Of course. And I'm going to ask you to, while I talk, bring the elements, because I think it's to start the conversation, right? As any good designer, let's step back for a moment, right? We're going to have various examples of different processes, but I want to start warming up you folks and asking what's your understanding what is a process, right? We have the definition of process from the Wikipedia, which is basically a series of actions or events performed to make something or achieve a particular result, or series of change that happen naturally, right? Which is very designy, right? Because a lot of things happen naturally in design, but we need to make sense of things. We need to use mapping and use visualization to understand how those things happen, right? So I ask my peers in this call to describe what types of process they normally will be working as design operators, right? So I have amazing things here from Peter, Brian, and Farid, but I want to hear you folks on the chat. So please join the FigJam or write in the chat about the type of process you normally redesign. And we have also a few questions coming next as you share your experience designing processes. So I can see Diego casing, adding a few ideas here. So we have, there's a normal design ops stuff, right? We have a lot in terms of design ops processes that we support the design organization, like onboarding, the design process itself, aligning life cycles, and helping people to achieve things like joining critiques, right? We also have yearly process, things that happens once a week, like performance reviews. So there's a lot on terms of process thinking, right? And this is also about the activities we do to make design better in the organizations, but also about the product development process itself, right? And what else do you have? Anything in your heads about other types of process that we do as design operators?
Great,
I'm seeing a lot of contributions here, which is great.
Yeah. By the way, I just want to
There's one very trick here.
Yeah. By the way, can you hear me now? I changed my microphone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, and on the side, I added my journey map of people-focused journey map and product-focused journey map. That also might help other people to spark some of the ideas where exactly they could focus on. So, but this is some of the things where I'm working currently, solving some of the challenges and evolving the maturity for specific practices. So yeah, but I'm curious what other people are doing. See that design system usage is popular, research libraries, great.
I see resourcing, and that's the resourcing process is something that's still a mystery to me for a large part. So I'd love to hear more about that from whoever's writing that or who's working on that.
I'm also seeing something really cool, which is org growth. Sometimes even the process of the organizational change is something that designers help as well. Not just designing organograms, but the change itself, how the new teams will work, or perhaps the roadmap, how this from the current scenario to the next scenario. I've seen a lot of reactions and a lot of contributions. It's made me very happy. Thank you, folks, for that. So, Brian, did you see anything that capture your attention that was not in your initial list?
Oh yeah, this is really exciting. Yeah, there's everything from just super high level, designing the entire organization and managing, change at a people and structure level, all the way down to how do we want to design the end of our handoff process or just this one type of employee's experience. And those are all things that are worthy of a process discussion. And it's so fascinating the way that it's really, for me, dependent on who you have in the room when you're having that discussion, because everyone will have a different idea of what the process is. Visualization is such a great way to compare those notes, to compare what somebody is thinking and saying, and allow them to look at it and move it around a little bit and understand it. It's a very big sense making. I love the way we started from this always feels like chaos. It's almost inescapable that it feels like a mess. And so many people in this call, I'm sure, are among the type of folks that, really, really want to organize that mess. So it's exciting to see all the different challenges. I hope a lot of these are successful.
I think we have a lot of information architects in this room, right?
Yeah.
So Peter, what caught your attention in this exercise of different types of processes people are working on?
For me, I see a lot that over the years I've contributed to. I haven't always visualized them. Sometimes they were documents on Confluence, and sometimes they were, manuals written down somewhere, and sometimes they were unwritten rules about how things are happening. But I I also realized that there are many processes that could benefit from visualizations, and I've seen them benefit from visualizations. One thing I'm very curious about, and I don't know if we'll get to it, but whether there are certain process patterns that are repeated in these different types of processes. So things like there is a need for a review, or there's a governance need that occurs in a different timeline from the regular work, and those kinds of processes, process patterns, I think are useful to start documenting as well, besides just collecting examples and learning how to do them. Thinking about reusable parts of processes may be a good thing. It's very meta though, so, but I'm sure the information architects among us will like that.
But that's a very, very smart comment, Peter, because we always use in our practice in UX design patterns, right? It's something we use frequently, right? And we listen to you talking about some of the patterns when we're designing process. It got me the idea of something that everyone has done in this room probably, which is redesigning the onboarding process. But there's so much similarities when you're thinking about onboarding. It's just not when you hire someone, right? There's so many different onboardings, like you're onboarding in a project, you're onboarding in a different initiative, or perhaps you're onboarding after maternity leave. There's so much similarities on that, right? And you can use the onboarding as a pattern for many different things, right? Farid, tell me, what you're thinking about this exercise, and if you have any opinion about process patterns.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that might be an interesting transition into the visualize part, how exactly we could organize the chaos that we see, how we could engage and empower people to understand and start crystallizing, solidifying the way how we work. So do you feel like we could switch into visualize part, or you wanted to share more things around the first continuous process and service design?
Definitely. I think we can go there because I think we can see those patterns. But just one comment before, Farid, is people are answering the questions we have here. Would you like to just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So we can see that there are some of the things that people are speaking about the project life cycle. Maybe that might be a next meetup that we could organize around resource planning, resource utilization, intake models, and all these kind of things, how we could organize the teams at scale. For some of the tools like Jira Plan or other Jira Line, or like using other tools as well. So that might be a great point here. Yeah, and I see a lot of people voted already for this, for your Danielle survey. So it's interesting to see how people are responding.
Yeah, these were questions that came up when we were, discussing the session earlier, and some of us, some of my co-presenters had
exactly. It was not even me writing the questions.
Interesting,
I think it was you or Brian.
I added a couple in, and it is kind of interesting to see. I wish we had more time. I would ask, like, what questions are we missing about this subject that somebody really would have expected to see, like, a broad distribution on. But it does seem like we have a good distribution on, like, pre-existing versus, well, we should have a process for this, but we don't. Just identifying those gaps. So thank you, everyone, for voting and refining your votes. In some cases, I think I've seen people move their little, wait a minute, I'm going to adjust that answer a little bit.
Yeah, that's true. Great. So let's start with the visualization part. So here we are going to share with you some of the practical things that might be useful, valuable for other folks. So 1 second, I'll just fix a couple stuff here, and we'll start moving, copying and pasting some of the things that we were working on. Great. So the first part that I would like to speak about is the visualization part. So all of us prepared some of the materials around this topic, so we would love to share that with you. And as always, please ask your questions. We would love to answer them as well. But first thing that I would like to start is sometimes it's really hard to understand your processes, right? And I would like to go back a little and then starting to understand the approach of standardizing engagement models first. So here's one of the examples that I'm using is when we are trying to standardize design processes, it's important to understand how this process
is related to specific engagement models. So here we have a couple of different groups levels, like organizational level, portfolio level, product level, shared services, and practices. And here you might see that there are some engagement models that people could think about and start thinking about, oh, I'm a part of product from 0 to 1 team. So that's why we could go deeper and start solidifying these processes. But here you might see that on the product level, we have product from 0 to 1 teams. This is like go-to-market teams, product 1 to infinity, growth teams, enhancements team, lighthouse team, innovation lab teams, and other things as well. But if we are speaking about, okay, if we are focusing on like product from 1 to infinity team, when we have already validated hypothesis, we have something on the market and we're trying to improve the experience, improve the metrics, let's go through this engagement model and try to understand how we could solidify and crystallize the process. So one of the popular frameworks here, I know everyone knows the design thinking, that like the main value here is that before doing any thinking about the solution, try to create a hypothesis and try to validate them first instead of doing something in the production. But within the time, we switched a little focus that design thinking is more about the approach, but we are missing the business and technology part in the way how we work. So that's why human-centered design became more popular at like maybe 5-7 years ago, when like we were thinking about the people, technology, business, and design all at once, right? So not only about like validating hypotheses in early stages, but also thinking about different departments and different interest groups. The next thing that I feel like it becoming more and more popular right now is Lean UX, when instead of just doing research, like build and learn phase, we are also trying to do the measuring and understand how this specific solution that we delivered to the market is behaving, how people are adopting it, how well it's we are able to achieve all our objectives. And some of the current trends that I'm seeing is the product-led growth. Maybe there will be some interesting frameworks and like maybe that might change as well. So, but also I wanted to share with you a couple other frameworks that I don't like. First one is SAFe. It's very engineering focused, really requirements focused, but they're forgetting about like, okay, it's not about requirements. It's about like why exactly we would like to build. And they added just like a small diagram in this like design thinking, but there's nothing about design in this SAFe framework. So yeah, a lot of people hate that. But I guess like they are good at scaling and they are good at standardizing the industry. They are good at certifications. There are a lot of agile coaches, scrum masters, and they are good at requirements and execution, but they are not well adapted to like design and product thinking. Great. So let's think about the Lean UX. Yeah.
I was going to say the SAFe people may have over-indexed on having events around design and not necessarily doing design.
Yeah.
But that's a personal opinion.
Peter, by the way, which framework are you using in Miro? Do you have any insight? Or you came up with your own?
We have several models, and I can show what we have for the, let's say, 1 to infinity models. I can copy and paste that here. But our growth team, for example, has a different model. They have a variant of the main model that is focused on defining experiments or defining hypotheses, defining experiments, measuring quickly, and throwing away a lot of solutions that don't work. Whereas the 1 to infinity models try to like decrease risk, do research up front, and do it right the first time, or do it right, do usability testing to make sure that you're right, do it again, and only then launch. So it's definitely at the very least 2 different models. And then we have designs. We've adopted the design sprint model and adapted it a little bit with the help of Jake Knapp, who wrote the book on design sprints. And I use that model for occasionally for certain hairy topics. Let me copy the process design model for 1 to infinity projects to the boards.
Yeah, and Ezekiel is adding the double diamond model. Yeah, great. So just a quick recap. We spoke about like if we are trying to organize and standardize our cows, we need to think about the engagement model first, because based on the like if it's like product 0 to 1 or go-to-market team, or product 1 to infinity or growth team, the processes might be and should be different, right? So based on the Lean UX approach, I came up with I didn't reinvent the wheel. I just put some more details into the way how we work. And here, based on Lean UX, I created this triple loop product lifecycle where we have learn, build, and measure phases. But again, when we're trying to visualize the processes, it's important to think about different maturity levels, because when we're doing visualizations, we need to understand that this process might not work for other teams because they might not have a user researcher in their team, or they might not have product analytics in their product area. So based on that, the next step when we are speaking about visualizations, it's important to think about maturity levels. And here are 3 of them. The A level is when we're working on the requirements. So safe works great here. Designers are just doing the prototyping work. We are not doing any user research, any user interviews, any validations. But the next one is C level, when it's much more mature, when instead of doing things, we are validating them first with specific user groups and then implementing that. And even much more advanced version of that is when we have learn, build, and measure in place, when we are not only doing research, but also measuring the results. And based on these maturity models, it's important to understand that your visualizations might be different for A level, C level, or E level. As you can see here, the steps are different, the phases are different as well. And here's one of the example visualization for A level project where we are just doing the requirements, because this is the easiest way. I like to use the swim lanes to visualize all the roles. I like to use the phases on top to visualize the timeline, and also capturing the way how the discovery is happening, how we are preparing some of the deliverables, how in some cases we are adding things into ID bank if they are out of scope, how we are doing the planning and review cycles with our engineers and our other partners, and when we are delivering that, how we are doing the review and how we are making such change requests into the work. So again, that might spark some of the ideas for others, how to visualize processes. And last thing that I want to mention around this topic is when I'm visualizing the process, I'm using these 5 main key components to visualize things. The first one called actors, activities, tools, ceremonies, and deliverables. So within this approach, you can visualize pretty much everything. Again, there are different ways how to visualize things, but this is the way how it worked for me. And one of the workshops that you could do together with your team when you're just starting and you would like to solidify the process is to ask people, work in groups, and came up with all the actors that they know that might be involved in the process without structuring and connecting the dots and visualizing them in the timeline. Or maybe asking people what kind of activities they're performing, which kind of tools they're using. And when you have these clouds of different components, then you can start visualizing and connecting the dots all together, finding the missing spots, finding the weak spots that will help you to understand that, oh, we need to improve the way how we would update that. I also have some learnings here. I will try to be fast because I know that others already, other speakers also have lots of things to share. But this is one of the examples how these different engagement models might be looking like. So for example, the onboarding flow, the transitional rotation plan, or when we are speaking about the offboarding, or when we are speaking about discovery sessions or user research activities, you could visualize pretty much everything with these 5 components. One of the important things that I wanted to mention is that it's when you're visualizing that, it's important to connect the dots and give people a link to where they could read more about that. So for example, you have that in your tool where you visualize the process and you need to give the link to the Confluence or any other knowledge-based platforms that you're using where people could go deeper and read more. Also visualizing all the different engagement models and which part of this engagement model is visualized here. I really like this approach of showing variations that this specific process might be changed. For example, if you're doing that onboarding for FTO of contract, the approach might be a little different. If it's dotted line manager onboarding or intern onboarding, the process might be simplified. Creating such role views with the links where they have much more simplified version of the diagram is also helps to adapt these practices and also get the feedback from people. And visualizing the timeline also helps. Sometimes when you are doing this first path of visualizing the processes and adopting that with the teams, sometimes people are just referring to the timeline because it's much more simplified version, and they can see average times that we need to spend on each steps. So for example, when we're speaking about discovery sessions, we need like 2 weeks for preparations. We might have 2 iterations of design sprints for 4 weeks, and then we are doing the planning and prioritization for another 2 or 1 week. And some of the quick learnings here, again, role views are really helpful to adopt the processes. So you might have one huge diagram that connects all the dots, but then you might have separate ones based on the roles. Visualize the timeline. This is the things that I mentioned before. And it's also an interesting practice if you will start adding links into every activity or ceremony or like deliverable that you have into Confluence page or any other knowledge-based platforms. Also, like this helps to connect the dots. And if people are interested, oh, how we could do meet and greet sessions, they could click on the Confluence link and see the more detailed information about how we are doing that. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your feedback. Yeah, what do you think? I'm curious to know.
I have one example of these another example of these role-based models. I pasted them at the bottom with the purple and the green flows. The top diagram is the overall process, which is broken down into phases and shows, and I know it's very tiny, but it shows deliverables that sort of flow through the timeline over time. And then the circles are the activities for one particular role. So an information architect would have his own poster, a business analyst would have his own poster, a visual designer would have their own poster with specific deliverables and activities that they would perform in their role. So they would be sort of personal little cards that they can have near their desk, and the big diagram could be sort of hung up on the wall in a shared room or behind people or wherever more people see it and wherever collaboration needs to be discussed as well.
Yeah, I love this idea of having posters. So this is another way how we could scale this, right? So how we can not only visualize the processes, but also make sure that they are adopted across others. And also, I'm curious, like, one of the things that I wanted to mention is that visualizing processes is not a bad thing, because some people are saying that, oh, if we will standardize everything, people will not have their own style of work integrated within our org culture, right? But my point is that visualizing and standardizing processes is not a rule. It's more like a guidance for people who are lost in the process and they are looking for some inspiration or understanding how we could work together, right? So that's why this is one of the learnings from my side that, yeah, it's more like a guideline rather than the actual rules. Great. Brian, will you like to go next and share your?
There you go. That's my contribution.
That you shared?
I hit the meme button, and I can still weigh in.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for doing that. This is great.
Actually, this may be something that sort of refers back to the service design introduction from Daniel. A process is never done, and a process also doesn't cover everything. That's two different things. One, it's never done, which means somebody needs to be in charge of keeping it up to date, or maybe a whole team, or it's somebody's responsibility to every now and then check, maybe do a survey. Hey, how are we feeling about the process? I don't know if I'm cutting the grass away from Brian's feet. If you wanted to say things like this, if not, I'll continue.
Oh, by all means, go on.
Okay, so that's one. It needs governance to keep it up to date. It needs like a survey to see if people are still using it, if it's still effective, if people know enough about it. Maybe it's time to do a retraining or something like that. And what was I saying? The second one, it doesn't cover everything. And this is where this meme comes in. If your project or initiative is different from others, then it's okay if your process is different from normal as well. And you need to take that into consideration. And whenever you start a process or go into a next phase of a process, you need to ask yourself, are we still following the process? Will we still be following the process? Are there reasons to change the process for the coming phase? for the rest of this initiative? And if so, what are the reasons and what can we learn from this? And learning can also happen in retros, but it needs to be an active decision, and you'd be surprised how often that decision needs to be made.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
That's
I
true.
think I agree.
Yeah, Daniel.
It's an ongoing loop. I agree completely.
Yeah.
I actually have a section at the end when we're talking about scaling, with tips about maintaining that consistency over time and talking some topics about feedback loops and governance that builds on top of what Peter was sharing. But Brian, I think you want to keep talking about your examples?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like I have a few examples, but I'm not sure that they're gonna, provide a whole lot more, clarity or color. The process diagrams are usually made to solve sort of, a bit of pain that a team is going through at a certain point in time. And I can just kind of drop something down here, but I don't think that it's surprising that the visualizations that we come up with here look an awful lot like journey maps. When you're trying to communicate with an audience, mostly of design participants, we're sort of thinking of what is their journey as they go through the activity or the jobs that they're trying to accomplish to deliver value through the design, process, deliver value to the people that are asking for, support and insight and deliverables from them. And then, we bring the skills and methods that we have to bear on that. Somebody was famous for saying this, and I can't quite pinpoint who it was, but once upon a time, someone said that we only kind of get paid for the last deliverable that we produce. And a lot of these diagrams, I think, are an attempt to pin down not just what the last deliverable we produce and hand off to the next, stakeholder is, but to increase the perception and value of all the things that kind of happen in the middle of that black box. Designers are.
This is awesome, Brian, because
yeah.
This is awesome, Brian, because when I choose some of the things to share with you folks, I was thinking exactly what you're addressing about the different audience needs when you're creating visualization and diagrams, right? So if you follow me on, I got a few examples, right? Of course, I brought some traditional riffs on the double diagram, right? So we have the version for our team in China. We are, of course, we adopt and we are inspired by the double diamond, but in a product organization that it's a global organization, different teams like innovation, platform. There's a lot of variation into the design process, but sometimes we need to communicate that. So you see one example here from Season G, which is one of the leader designers in China. And then we have another one by a researcher, which touches on the subject of value proposition as well as part of the process. So it's not a double diamond, it's a triple diamond. We also have an amazing visual explanation about the elements of experience, which is similar to what Peter shared, I think, on the above, but it was inspired in, I think he's actually the godfather of diagrams in UX, James Garrett. So he created this diagram 20 years ago with elements of user experience, and James was using the similar artifact to communicate how we do things, right? So you can see here showing problem space, solution space. It's a very interesting diagram, right? And then if we move from talking about the way we deliver and ship design and product, I want to show you folks things that are more opsy from a design perspective, right? So when I was working in 2017 in a big corporation, I noticed how the conversations about learning were distributed across different systems in the company, right? So perhaps it's the notes you're having a one-on-one, you have the system for performance review. So I remember that I was confused with the information. Make this visualization about the learning opportunities, which is quite silly because you don't quantify how much you know about a topic, but it was just a play around how can I make that visible. And it's still something that I have up to today, and I update this canvas every year so I can track my growth, right? And recently we did some work which is specific for technical skills in design, which is a skill matrix. You see, it is not fancy as a visualization, but This is work that normally managers will do with their designers every ounce, but it's a spreadsheet world, right? So you have the skills and you have the rating. So what we did is bring that information to Figma and use the Figma components to actually tag this information. So you have stars, right? So let's say that you have a core skill. We create basically a taxonomy for technical skills, and we use that not just in the performance review. This was a big piece of work. It was the entire team at Farfetch collaborating on that. So it's just not a visualization, but it's also a tool for them, right? And here we have visualization that enable great conversations, right? One thing that we do in order to improve our design critique, this is a diagram by Bruno Borella, is a design critique canvas. So it's a way to quickly see what is happening before the critique and also being very specific about the feedback you need. We also, sometimes we create ad hoc diagrams just to talk about how the process are running through, right? So this one here is we trying to compare the cadence between different teams, right? So it's very linear, but it shows how they have the similar ceremonies, but the flow is different in each team, which was quite helpful for us to discuss how processes are effective or not, right? And then we have a traditional as is map here for onboarding. The twist on this one, this is from Bruno Boeger and others, we have service designers helping us on that, is thinking about onboarding, not just the first moment of the onboarding, but it's your first year at the company. There's so much things you're going to be onboarded. So we kind of have the zoom out perspective on onboarding. And the last one is a visualization, but more like a story, like a comic strip, right? This is in Portuguese, as you see, my native language. And this is about explaining to people how you sign up for a training process, right? And it's very lightweight in copy, but it's about, okay, you invited, then there's an online conversation, you work hard, then there's a listening session, you celebrate, then there's the final rehearsal, and then you're online. So using visuals to communicate process that could be a little bit complex, right? But create that visual impact, and quickly you try to use that to communicate that the process is complex, but you can go through really easily. So you have emotions, you have expressions that I think help to make the process more warm, right? So that's the examples I selected for you folks. I think in the topic of visualization, and building on the topic, on the comment from Brian, I think you're gonna see many similarities. There's a lot about using journeys or using time as the universal dimension we need, but also abstractions. And I see Canvas, I see other tools that we use for making not just the process visible, but the conversation that is needed for you to adopt a process or to improve a process visible, which I think is an important part of this.
That's a great insight.
Yeah,
that a
that's true,
storyboard
that's true.
is a process diagram. I love that insight. It
Me
satisfies
too. Giving
our
some-
initial definition. It's sequential. It has a result. It has an outcome. If it's crafted like a story, there's a beginning, middle, and end. Fantastic.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much for sharing. I guess like we could do a quick recap around the visualization part chapter that we wanted to discuss. So we covered the ways how it's important. So go and narrow down your focus, starting from engagement models, then focusing on specific like product 1 to infinity engagement model, going down into the different maturity models and visualizing all these key components. I really like one of the comments that Chloe shared, atomic process approach. Yeah, maybe that's a great thinking. We also covered the learnings. We also covered some of the examples how other teams are visualizing their processes. I guess like one of the most important insight here, it's a journey mapping exercise, right? We can visualize all the actors, all the activities that we're performing, all the outcomes that we are creating as a part of the team. And I really love this idea of having posters that will help to socialize this new approach that we are making, and also help people, if they're lost in the process, we are not creating rules, we are creating guidelines. They could follow some of the best practices that we came up with, test this with specific teams, and then scale that. Yeah, and another learning, my favorite one is, yes, sure, these elements of product design diagram and storyboarding exercise that helps to share the story and maybe adding some emotions, adding some like this details into the way how we work. Great, let's start the next one. The next topic is called audit and feedback loops. So we wanted to discuss a little bit about how to do the actual analysis, right? So when we visualize the process, it's easier to understand the gaps. It's easier to understand the weak spots in the process, right? And here I wanted to show some of the examples. So like long time ago, like 2-3 years ago, when we were using Sketch and Abstract, this is the diagram that I was making where I showed the current process on the top and the new process much more simplified by using automations, because we were able to simplify the process. We don't need to support many tools that we needed to support at that time, and we were able to simplify the amount of tools that were involved, the amount of time, and communication gaps. Communication gaps I'm calling one of the specific metric where if there are like 10 people in the process, and we were able to simplify it into like 3 people in the process, that means that the communication gaps, we were able to decrease that by like 60% by just like removing some people from the process and replacing this with automations. Again, this kind of very detailed process-related activities could be helpful for smaller routine work. We will not able, and we don't need to automate things when we are speaking about innovation, research, and creativity, right? But when we are speaking about the handoff process, there are lots of opportunities here to explore. So one of the most important things is amount of tools involved, amount of people involved, and amount of time that on average we are spending. Here, also visualizing the time, the people as a part of FigJam, like as a part of journey map or experience map helps a lot. Always doing some usability testing, trying new ways, trying new tools, trying some automations or plugins, validating some of the hypotheses that we came up with, and finding the right improvements to the process of how we could evolve and make it much more better, right? And one of the other things when I was speaking with Candace, she is going to speak at DesignOps Summit 2022, where she is going to speak about standardizing design and scale. She has really good experience at working at Meta and now at Netflix, and it's really interesting topic. And one of the key insights that I heard from her is that it's not only about design, but it's also about the cognitive load on the people. So when we are visualizing the process and trying to simplify it, the cognitive load is one of the other not metrics, but one of the other key things to mention that when we are designing things, designing the processes, making sure that the cognitive load is not high and we are actually simplifying it. And for design friends of Figma chapter members, I added here a promo code that gives you books for cost over 150 for free. So if you would like to use that promo code, please feel free to do that. This is only for Friends of Figma chapter members. Great. Regarding the audit and feedback loops, does anyone wants to share anything here or any questions if you have or feedback? Peter, Danielle?
I will talk a little bit about that in the next one, scaling, because I think one important aspect of audit and feedback loops is when we think about process change over the years, not months, right? So one of the tools I'm suggesting in the framework we're going to be showing is that you have an amazing engagement when you want the initial process change. Everyone jumps in on Miro or FigJam, and we have many ideas. We do the service blueprint, and we envision the experience map for the future. But what happens when the time is that you adopt iterative process on the change, and the team changes itself. So if you look at that work 2 years ahead, and that happens a lot in design teams, right? So you see that the same ideas repeating over and over. So I think it's quite so important to have this idea that you kick off with a document, you visualize, but you track the changes over time. Not just because you win, but the learnings, right? The things when things fail, who tried that before, right? So in big teams, design teams, global teams with 100 people, right? So you see that the same energy applied to redesigning the critique spread across the globe, right? So I think when you consciously write about and celebrate the work, but with the lens of reusing things and tracking the change over time, I think it makes a lot of sense. I'm gonna talk about that later, but it's really about organizational memory sometimes.
Great. Yeah, and I see that Peter added some slides. Peter, could you please click on your user profile in the top right corner and click on Spotlight Me so people could follow your slides? Peter, we are not able to hear you.
Let me hit the unmute button. Sorry. What I pasted was two images. One is a spreadsheet or a piece of a spreadsheet that we use to track projects. And in this case, it's like from 2 releases. And again, it's a snapshot. So you only see a couple of projects listed. I need to be able to move around. So you need to see a couple of projects from our enterprise stream, which is more of our administrative stream. And for each of these features, we try to track the UX quality after it's done. It's sort of almost like at the end of the quarter, we determine, are we happy with the quality of our results? And some remarks about whether it's good or good enough or just good enough. We explicitly have it like a 4-star rating or four points and not one in the middle, so that you're sort of safe in the middle and everything is happy. No, you need to choose whether it's good enough or not good enough, or extremely good or extremely bad. So this is one way for us to track whether we're happy with the results, and also an indicator to see if we need to improve our way of working for the next time around. And it's also, we try to be brutally honest there to each other. What we also try to do is to track whether certain, let's say, activities help raise the quality. And by tracking the quality and tracking whether certain activities are done, we can try to correlate those two. And to do that, I have this second image pasted, which is an overview of the types of reviews that designers go through in the life cycle of, let's say, an initiative, one project. It's mapped to whether they're ad hoc or recurring, and whether it's designers only at the top or more cross-functional at the bottom. And it's quite a number. And I've tried to, as my role of DesignOps person, I've tried to standardize the naming and terminology and the guidelines for each of these events or moments, review moments, so that teams can learn from each other. And like I said, we can start tracking them using the same names and see if performing, let's say, this random cross-functional UX research review, if that correlates with having a higher quality overall over time and over multiple initiatives. So for me, this is DesignOps activities, determining the types of reviews that we do, standardizing them, developing guidelines for them, like who's the participant, how often should they be done, and what kind of feedback is expected and what is not expected, what kind of input do you provide before the review. Those kinds of elements are all defined somewhere on Confluence. And because we have a defined set of activities, we can start tracking whether they have an effect on the outcomes, on the UX quality in this case.
Great, thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Lots of things. I know, like, we are adding lots of material, so I hope that will spark lots of ideas on your side. And like that was the purpose of this call. To again, there are lots of materials around processes. So let's switch to the last topic, scale and change management. Who would like to start? Danielle, would you like to go first? And could you please click on your image here so you could spotlight yourself so others could follow you?
Yes, no problem, right? So yeah, so I was talking earlier about going meta and thinking about a process about processes, right? So this is something I learned while I was still working at Babylon, is that I think as designers, we rely a lot in visual information. Visualization is the thing we do, right? But I think what I normally care about is having a mix of documentation and visualization. And what I found over the years is that there's a kind of, it's not a rule book, but it's a good practice when you're working with change management and process, right? I'm just jumping in right now on the board and sharing with you the steps, right? This was actually an article that I wrote a few years ago, 2 years ago. But if you follow me, I'm gonna ask that now. The steps are quite simple, right? So it's basically you start with the basics. And when I mean basics, is I think as research, as designers, we always have to start with great data and insights, right? So, and one thing that is different is when you have a process challenge is to rely on third-party, not just perception, but information about the problem itself, right? So my recommendation is that if you're leading a process change, do your own research, even if it's a few interviews, but don't start with that. It's quite important, I think, having that qualitative perception about how this is really affecting, what's the narrative behind that change. So that's my recommendation. We start with the basics and do your own research. And then on the second moment is map the as-is journey together, right? A lot of people, sometimes they are struggling with the process. Is the curse of knowledge. They're not even sometimes able to talk about the details of why they are struggling with that, right? So I think the exercise of using service design mapping helps a lot. And it's particular, you're winning if you start with everyone that is going to be affected by that process. So mapping together is really a win-win situation, right? Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes we do the mapping and we just want to do the change. And that's where my request for you folks is that have a break. Don't start with that. Document your change, document your intentions, write the same way we have one pages for product. I think it's quite important. On top of your Miro or FigJam board, write a one-pager about the change and how you're going to measure that change, that process change over time, right? Because that's your kind of intention needs to be solid, needs to be solidified on that moment, right? My fourth step is to give people time. So you write the proposal for the change with the diagrams, with the documentation, but let people read the documentation, ask questions, and enrich the information you have up at the moment, right? And even before starting the process change, and I like to use this term because I always think that everything should be framed as an experiment, right? But before you even run the experiment in the process change, I think you always need to create the feedback loops. Create the moments for talking about that process change, which are not the same moments you're talking about your product work, right? Because sometimes if you're going to talk about that process change during your retro, or you're not giving space for the conversation about process itself. So create the feedback loops. Peter was talking about surveys, but sometimes this is like channel. Sometimes it's just a meeting just for that. If the process is sensitive, it's important to create that space and time for people to talk before you run the experiment. Schedule that feedback loop, right? Or plan that feedback loop. And then you run the experiment. Sometimes it could be something simple, like a week. You change in a meeting, you change in a design process, right? Mm-hmm. But the thing that I think it makes a lot of sense for me, and I learned that, is to write about the things as you go. So if you run the experiment, you edit your initial document, right? And the final one for me is celebrating, because process change sometimes can be very tricky, can be very annoying for people. So over-communicate, celebrate your change, and create the log. Remember about the log. The log is very simple. You just say what changed, what you achieved in that process change over time, right? And you connect with your initial document. So you have like a memory about the change over time. So someone might be trying to make the same change. If they have your initial document, your one-pager, and your log, your conversation about change will be way easier, right? So I think that's my process. There's an article about that. This is something that I'm trying for a few years already and being applied for design critiques, skill metrics. I think it's a lot of the work I do. I'm using this meta process, right? And it's been very helpful for me as well as I'm improving my writing skills, right? I'm a visual person. I'm happy living in Miro FigJam, but I think writing gives the accessibility for that information about the change as well. And it helps to create that tracking about the change itself.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Yeah, we are almost out of time. Peter, do you want to go over, that's your slides, right?
Yeah, it is. Sure. And this is about scale. I tried to show where the design org team lives, and the design org team lives in a product excellence team at Miro, which is part of the product organization. So I don't just support, or me and my team don't just support designers, but we support product managers and analytics people and product marketeers and engineers as well. And there's some numbers about the scale. So if you're a ratio person, you can look at that. What I also did was model this product excellence team using the visual language that Kate Kaplan used when she describes the team models for DesignOps teams. So if you read that article, if you haven't read that article, go read that article first and then look at this diagram and you'll understand it better. And what I also did is, for comparison, do sort of the org chart of the DesignOps team at ServiceNow, my previous employer, where we had 25 people in the DesignOps team, but even more people supporting designers as well, which included a business ops team, the design system team, which was separate from the DesignOps team, researchers, of course, and let's say design team management. And all of them helped designers, or helped create a better circumstances for design, which is, I think, what DesignOps' mission is. And there's some numbers in there as well, again, for ratio freaks. Go and study those numbers.
Great, thank you. Brian, would you like to share some of your notes that you want to share?
Yeah, just below in the diagram was the thing that I wanted to share, and I wish I had a good source for the origin of this diagram, but I encountered it not too long ago, and it really turned a light bulb on over my head for, observing like the history of different change efforts across the organization and at different scales, and seeing like, oh, this one ended up with people being very nervous about it. This one ended up with, we tried it 3 times and it, we didn't succeed. So this one gave me a great way to sort of like diagnose from the types of failure we've encountered what might have been missing from our previous effort, and then the ability to lean on this and learn more. So that's what I wanted to share when it came to change management today.
I love this. Like, studying failure is half of what we should be doing.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, totally agree. And one of the things that, if you're interested in change management, we already had an event covering this topic. So you could go through the YouTube channel and see the recording if you're interested. But from my side, what I wanted to mention is that when we are scaling the new processes, it's important to map these processes with the tools that we are using, trying to use the same vocabulary, trying to use the same statuses in Jira, for example, that are mapped with the same terminology that we're using in our process diagrams. Also, some of the things like, again, doing things in Miro or FigJam, this is great for brainstorming, but when we're trying to organize our work, it's important to use some like Excel type tools like Notion, Coda, or Airtable, right? And in Coda, there are some interesting tags that allows you to not only document the processes, but also visualize them. So you don't need to recreate such diagrams in like different tools. You can like visualize the process out of the text directly in Coda and export as SVG. They have user journey maps. They have like different things as well. And last thing that I wanted to share is that when we would like to share these new changes into the process within the whole organization, I guess, integrating that into skill metrics and making sure that, for example, we introduce design sprints by Google Venture, how we could make sure that it's actually implemented. So we could standardize our program planning templates, resource plans, and we could also integrate that into our skill metrics and making sure that if designers are switching into senior roles, they need to make sure that they need to know and they need to have experience, skills to conduct design sprints, for example. So this is the way how we could scale this knowledge and practices within the whole organization. So we had lots of things to share today. Thank you very much for joining. There is another event that is happening right now as a part of Rosenfield Media. I will be going there right now, where we are going to speak about, yeah, today is a very busy day. The Mysterious Case of the Missing UX Career Path by Peter. So if you're interested, there is a link. Let me add the link into our FigJam file. So if you want to follow me and go to another event, please do. See you there. And thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you for moderating.
Thank you, Daniel, Peter, and Brian. It was a pleasure to speak with you.
Always great discussions.
And work together.
Cheers all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.